took over a house. There was a pair of semi-detached houses, the only ones on the side of the road, about 150 yards from the headquarters. And I just took this. Nobody said I wasn't to, nobody said I was to, but I did it. And I just ran a first aid post from this place for about a week. And they took the casualties by jeep to one of the dressing stations. There were only 3 or 4 main dressing stations. And I finished up with 4 blokes the final evening, and I was invited to clear off across the river, but I wasn't going to leave these 4 blokes because they were dependent on me. The one of them was paralysed anyway. They were dependent upon me for liquid refreshment, which I got from the water bug. That was about it.
So I think that is incredible. That the selflessness. I think we are all deeply impressed by that. I don't want to embarrass you, but we are deeply impressed by that. So you know, I think you should be incredibly proud of that. We're proud of you for doing that.
Well,
So, another question before Peter gets so embarrassed that he doesn't want to talk again, Madam.
What would you say, looking back at your glider career, was number 1 the high points and number 2 the low point?
I don't think there were, quite honestly, I don't think there were any low points really. Well, except probably when my second pilot was taken ill 2 days short of D-Day, and we'd been briefed, we knew where we were going, he was taken ill, and there was nobody to take his place, so I finished up not going and riding around the camp on a service motorcycle because I'd already got my own motorcycle on the camp anyway. So that was, if you like, I don't know what the high point was really.
Was it not a high point? Did you not use that motorcycle to court Jean?
No, that was a different motorcycle.
Put me in my place again.
That was later on.
Can you give us some idea of the handling quality of the gliders?
Oh.
Did you have trims in all 3 axes, or?
Yes.
So you could trim it out mainly, could you?
Yes, but I can't say that I recall doing much trimming because you're not flying as a glider very long. In our practice flying, we would only be probably landing from 1,000 feet, so you were not in the air for very long. At the most 2,000 feet. So really, you're not flying very long, except on tow, basically. With the Hotspur, I did 2 or 3 of those remote releases, which were much more interesting because we had to find the airfield that would go in the right direction, having let go. Because we let go, we were never let, except on one occasion early on with a Sterling at Leicester Forest East, I think it was. He had an engine catch fire on takeoff, and I was already airborne behind him, probably flying at about 10 feet up. And he let me go with the tow rope, which was very sensible of him. But I managed to get it down on the by the end of the runway, so that was quite exciting while it lasted. It didn't even categorise as a flight in my logbook.
You had the intention of flying. I would have logged it. So,
I was intrigued by the twin tool line. Does that make the rudder effectively redundant?
No, but it certainly meant that it was more stable probably on tow than it would have been with a single tow rope. I mean, having flown proper gliders since then with a single tow rope and a single attachment, which is invariably at the front of the glider, then I would say that it probably makes it more stable. But of course, it distributed the load as well. The only trouble would be, it didn't happen to me, but if you had one come out and one stay in, then that life became a little bit more exciting.
How are we doing for time? Do we, I'm going to take one,
just one more selfish one.
you may, yeah, and then have one more after Sandy.
Peter, you mentioned you were towed off at 30-second intervals.
Yes.
How did you then had this 3-hour plus transit to
Yeah.
Arnhem? What formation were you in? Were you in a stream or were you in
We were
a
in
massive
two streams.
two streams?
I have no recollection as to how it happened, but it was very cleverly planned so that we went over Aldeburgh, I think it was, in two long lines, and there were 1,000 fighter aircraft in the air to protect us. I mean, bloody marvellous. That was the first thing. So, I mean, any German who we did get some anti-aircraft fire over Herzogenbosch, which was the last turning point before Arnhem. But one or two gliders got hit by anti-aircraft fire, or they hit the tow ropes, and they came down prematurely in German territory as it was then. But the thing was that the American, it's very easy to forget that the American airborne, the 81st and the 101st,
82nd and
82nd and 101st airborne divisions, which still exist today, they landed on both sides of 7 bridges, except Nijmegen, and they had to fight their way across the river after that. But that was so sensible to land both sides of the bridge. And of course, we couldn't do that at Arnhem because there wasn't any landing area north of the river. There was south of the river. It's arguable that we should have landed south of the river as well, and that would have helped the people. The 600, only 600 out of 11,000 actually got to the bridge in the end.
It would have also helped if the 21st Panzer and the 16th Panzer Grenadiers hadn't been resting there as well. I think that I think there were 3. I think it's 3. Somebody might correct me. I think there were 3 divisions of Panzer divisions resting at Arnhem that intelligence had picked up, but that they decided they didn't want to accept that intelligence on the grounds that they were going anyway. And you know, what's the use of having intelligence if it's going to stop you from going on the operations?
So they sent the chap to hospital.
They did. The intelligence officer was actually found to be medically unfit, and was sent off. So he couldn't actually raise the question. A Royal Air Force Spitfire and NFR Spitfire even took photographs of the 21st Panzer. And this is the 21st Panzer, which is rather famous. Stalingrad. It was then sent to the desert. It was in Italy. It was in Arnhem. This was a pretty worked up organisation that had veteran soldiers. The 2 things about the German army to remember at this time were that the German army, the Wehrmacht, had not called up its instructors to go and fight on the front line until February 1945. So they were still training, they still had their training organisation in place, they were still taking people through until February 45, which is when the whole structure started to fall to bits. And also in September 44, they still were building large numbers of armoured vehicles, Panther tanks in particular, and still getting them to the front line. A lot of them broke down, but they still had a gun on them that worked. And the problem with paratroopers and light infantry is they don't have many anti-tank weapons, except for that wonderful thing called the Piat, which is a spring-loaded thing which fires around out. So you have to get so close to the tank that you can almost see the driver's eyes before you fire it. And I find the whole thing quite remarkable. But it was a bridge too far, and I think despite the bravery of the glider pilot regiment and everyone who travelled in them, you know, it was going to be a close thing anyway.
Yeah.
But it's interesting if you look at the Guards Armoured who were there. The first 3 tanks across Nijmegen Bridge. The lead tank was Lord Carrington, who was formerly the Foreign Secretary. The second tank across was Johnny Johnson, who used to be the cricket commentator. He commanded that one. And the third one was the guy who used to, when I was at school, fit you up for your shoes in Trickers in Jermyn Street. And he was still working in the 1960s and owned a shop in Jermyn Street. So you had, so if you like, the first 3 tanks across the bridge were all known characters, or certainly to me, which I think is a fantastic sort of summary of this operation, that all these people that went on and did things, people did the most remarkable things, almost having been tested by this operation. So you know, it, by no means was Arnhem a complete disaster, because it did actually shock the Germans into moving all their flak forward for the Rhine. And that's the other thing. The Luftwaffe ran the flak. Flak was still working on May the 7th, 1945. Aircraft were still being shot down by flak because the Germans were just the masters of anti-aircraft fire. So, you know, I'm deeply impressed that you should want to fly a balsa wood aeroplane without an engine over enemy territory. I think that's just quite remarkable. One more question. No more questions? Have we had enough?
I think we ought to mention